Welcome to another podcast of Indigenous Roots and Hoots. Indigenous Roots and Hoots is a podcast production of the Legacy of Hope Foundation, exploring and discussing Aboriginal culture and topics of special interest for all Canadians. I'm your host, Gordon Smets. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. Today I have a special guest with me. She's a manager at the Legacy of Hope Foundation. She grew up in Northern Ontario, and she's Ojibwe, I believe. I'll let her tell you more about herself. So Irene Goodwin is our guest today. Maybe Irene, you could just start by talking a bit about yourself, including your family, where you were born, and a bit of your cultural identity.
Hello, Gordon. Thank you for having me. Wasa-Newab-Ma'iingan-Anang-Quay. My given name is Irene Goodwin. My Indigenous name was given to me by my elders in Northwestern Ontario. Essentially, the translation, Wasa-Newab, is to see far. Ma'iingan-Anang-Quay is the wolf star woman. So altogether, the name denotes being able to see, as well as with using the wolf and the star. And as you mentioned, I'm a Ojibwe. I come from the Treaty 3 and the Treaty 9 areas, and I grew up in a northern community in the Northwestern Ontario, and I was fortunate to spend some time on the trap lines.
Wow, interesting. Tell us a bit about your job and how's that going. I understand, you are the manager of the exhibits and also work on special projects. Maybe talk a little bit about that before we get into the main part of this podcast.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I work with the Legacy of Hope Foundation. I've been there for just over 2 years now. I'm the manager of exhibitions and curatorial projects. We currently have 18 exhibits with 2 in development. So by the end of 2020, we should have 20 exhibits. The Legacy of Hope Foundation, as you are aware, is an organization that seeks to educate Canadians and the population about the residential school system and its ongoing impacts on the Indigenous community. So many of our exhibitions are aimed towards that subject matter, as well as related subjects such as the 60 Scoop and Missing and Murdered.
I understand that we just finished a project that I happen to be on, and that's the Escaping Project. So how's that going? When is that coming to completion?
As I mentioned, we have 2 projects in development right now. One of them is the Escaping Residential Schools, which is the project you were a survivor participant in. The other one is Wasa-Newab-Ma'iingan-Anang-Quay. That's a project aimed on missing and murdered. Both of those projects right now are in the content or fabrication stage. So the Escaping exhibit has completed all its content and is right now in the fabrication stage. Due to the COVID-19 travel restrictions, we have had to postpone launch dates. So initially, the Escaping project would have been launched at the end of March. Because of all the travel restrictions, we have postponed that launch date. And at this point, we're now looking at, rather than having a physical launch for that particular exhibit, because we want to launch it as soon as possible, we're looking at doing a more of a virtual launch. So something like that in June, potentially. The Wasa-Newab-Ma'iingan-Anang-Quay exhibit, that we did push the date back by about a month. So we're hoping we can launch that in August. Again, with that particular launch event included the National Gathering of Families. So we may actually have to push that to September. Again, just being mindful of whatever travel restrictions we have in place due to the pandemic.
With, I guess I should say, growing up as a child in Northern Ontario, You want to talk a little bit about that? Were you taught your traditional language and culture, and who taught you? How was that like growing up?
Um, yeah, initially I spoke fluent Ojibwe. I was able to read and write syllabics. I lost the language shortly after beginning Indian day school when I was maybe about 4 years old. My family, the adults and extended relatives often spoke Ojibwe or a combination of OG Cree. So the language was all around, but I think it's also important to note that they were forced to attend the government-run residential schools, and they also struggled with maintaining culture, language, and traditions. So it was really a mixed environment where there was English being spoken, some language, so a mix of half English, half Ojibwe, and then same thing with the culture. So in many ways, there was a shaming of the Indigenous ways, but there was also the ways taking place in a more hidden way, if that makes any sense.
Sure, it's happened to me. Yeah, I also went to Indian residential school, and that's the escaping project that I was involved in. And I also went to the federal day school, and I was more at home, and I found it somewhat easier to live on the reserve and go to school, but it had its drawbacks too. So uh, yeah, so this podcast is about Aboriginal culture and sharing your knowledge and humor. You know, as Indigenous people, we have many stories that we pass down. I understand you have a particular interest in the Sasquatch, or as known in other places as Bigfoot. Maybe we can talk about that and your experiences. You know, where I come from, Sasquatch is a legend, and in many people's minds, it's alive and real. And some people, you know, are not quite convinced. You know, and there's been many people experiences, stories, and about Sasquatch and this intriguing creature that seems to exist around us. You know, and what's your with your experience? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think it would be fun to chat about Sabe. That's what we call him in Ojibwe, the
What you
Sasquatch or
call
the
it?
Bigfoot. Sabe,
Sabe?
Sabe. Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I guess with for me, I've been hearing about him in some way, either directly or indirectly, since I was a small child. I mentioned being on the trap line with my aunt and uncle. Um, so, when you're a small child, sometimes you listen to adults more closely when they start talking in the low mumbles. And from time to time, they start whispering in Ojibwe, right? So that as a small child, I was one of the nosy ones, I suppose. And that's when I heard the Ojibwe start going into the low hushed Ojibwe speaking language. I knew that they were going to talk about something that they didn't really want me to listen to. So as a just telling a little, for example, there was one time I was in northwestern Ontario, a place called Whitewater Lake, and I was with my auntie and my uncle at their trapping cabin, which is really remote. So that's about 3 days traveling over the land and the water to get to that area at that time. So there's no humans around. It was just the three of us in a trapper's cabin, a one room trapper's cabin with a wood stove in the corner. Um, so my aunt and my uncle and myself were there. My aunt and I were inside the cabin, and my uncle was outside, and he was chopping wood. And I think it was late fall, just before the winter set in. So he was needing to chop some wood, and it was starting to get dark. Then he comes in really quickly into the cabin, and he shuts the door and he locks it, and he moves over to my aunt, and he's kind of standing there looking a little startled. And she says to him in Ojibwe, what's wrong with you? And right away, he looks over at me and he goes into hushed tones and he's speaking in Ojibwe. And they're hushing whisper talk between each other. So I came and I started to try to listen. And I realized that he was telling her that there was something walking on the ridge just above and behind the cabin. And it had scared him. So he stopped chopping the wood and he came into the cabin. So again, they heard me listening to them talking about that, and they stopped talking. So I always wondered, what was that something that made my uncle, who grew up in the remote woods all his whole life, he very rarely came out of the communities, the northern communities. So he was familiar with the landscape, the environment, all the animals there. Nothing would chase that man, away, aside for something that would startle him or be unusual, such as the sabe or the Bigfoot. So that's just one example of something that had happened as a small child that had initially caught my attention and made me wonder, what is that's walking in the woods that they worry about from time to time, that as a small child, I was told, be careful. There's kokokos in the woods, right? And don't wander too far. And there was other times that they would scan the forest and say, yeah, it's perfectly fine. You go out and collect wigas, the birch bark so that it can make fire or something like that. Or I'd go cut branches so that they could make bedding for the tents or whatnot. Other times they would scan the environment and they'd say, no, you can't do that. You have to stay really close to the campsite. And I always used to wonder, what are they afraid of in the bush? That there's definitely something odd out there that they're not really talking about. So as I got older, you start seeing in the 70s, there was that program there with Leonard Nimoy, In Search of Bigfoot. You might have seen that one back then. And of course, there was a Patterson film that came out in the early 70s too. So a lot of that had caught my attention. And then when I became older, I started paying more attention to what was going on. And we had started to live near this place called Uppsala, Ontario. It's between Kenora and Thunder Bay. And the community that we lived in wasn't Uppsala. It was north of Uppsala along the CNR line. And that community was maybe about 20 minutes further north from where Uppsala is, which itself is maybe about 3 hours away from Thunder Bay. But in that particular area, there was a lot of things that would happen. And we thought that there was definitely the Sasquatch in that area. So a number of incidents from fishing to being followed, that kind of stuff. And I know in northwestern Ontario, there's a lot of the remote communities there that also reported seeing Bigfoot, that startled them in the communities, or that they witnessed walking along the side of the lake. So I think pretty much my whole life I've heard stories of Bigfoot, and I found it quite fascinating. And I believe it's a real creature.
Wow. So you believe it's a living creature?
I believe it's a living creature. There's a lot of different speculations, of course, right? So because Bigfoot is pretty much seen on every continent of this planet. Every nation, Indigenous nation, has some kind of word for it, right? So Sasquatch comes from the Coast Salish or the West Coast Indians. They call it Sasquatch. More modern humans refer to it as Bigfoot. Like the Bella Cola Nation on the West Coast, they refer to them as bogs. And I think, and there's also, you can hear the word skokum being used, which is a Chinook word that means big or powerful. And then there's another West Coast nation that called the Sasquatch Sitko, which means spirit in Salish. So so there's different names. Chickasaw calls it Lofa, Choctaw call it Sampe. So there's different names for it, and even the Cheyenne, their word for it, when you translate it to English, comes out sounding like big spirit being. So even within the Indigenous nations, some of that translation is referring to it as big, powerful, or a spirit, or some kind of being. And in some of the stories, they say that it's both. It's both physical and it's spirit. In some, they say it's more this and it's more that. It's interesting, though. I find it really, like, it's a topic that's always fascinated me, especially when you think about all other parts of the world. They have the same kind of being, if that's what it is, right? So in Nepal, for example, they have the Yeti, so people know that as like the abominable snowman that's supposed to live in the Himalayan mountains. And then in the same area, another type of Yeti, they call it the Mete or something like that lives in the upper Tibetan forest. Mm-hmm. And then in the Caucasus Mountains, they have the Almasti or the Almaz. And then China has this Bigfoot that they call the Yeren. And then I think South America has a Bigfoot. Brazil has one. Indonesia, they have the orange pendik. And in Australia, they have the Yowie. And that one, they say the Yowie looks really similar to the Sasquatch. It's 5 to 10 feet tall. And the word Yowie, the way they spell is Yowie, but it comes from the Aboriginal word Yuwi, which is Yuwi, and that means dream spirit. So even like how the Australian Aborigines consider that being there is very similar how the Indigenous people in North America consider that being as potentially a dream spirit or some type of spirit.
Yeah, it's amazing it hasn't been caught or found, remnants of it. Maybe that's why it's, part spirit. And I know that I've read a little bit about it. And in particular, I just found it fascinating that it was seen in parts of northern Russia and, of course, all over Canada. So even where I come from in northern Manitoba, I had some friends who were hunting along the Churchill River, and they came across some tracks that were, not human, and that they were, basically, spaced too far for a human to trace. Mm-hmm. And it came. The footprints came out of the water, walked along the beach, and then cut straight up this hill. And it would be next to impossible for a regular person, the normal person, to walk up this hill, which is full of trees and pretty steep. So that's where the tracks led. And I guess the same group of people, I guess along the same trip, were camped out, and middle of the night they started hearing this eerie screaming in the bushes, and it was a sound that they never heard before. These guys are hunters, so they know all the animal sounds. So but this sound was howling, was so eerie that they couldn't sleep all night. So it tells a little bit about, it makes it more intriguing,
Yeah.
Where is this thing, Is it really alive? Yes, for
that's
some
what
people.
I find. Yeah, I find that so fascinating because, just as you said, these are people very often that witness this creature or this being, and they themselves have spent a lot of time in the forest. Like they're not going to mistake something. They know definitely what a bear is, what a moose looks like in various angles. They're not going to mistake that, right? Yeah. And there's various sightings. Like I can tell you one that I found, I heard about, was really interesting. It came from a Northwestern Ontario First Nation community, a remote community. And it was from the elders in that community, and they were a little upset about that there was a Sasquatch around, a family around, and it wasn't that they were upset about them being around. What they were upset about is that they had been witnessed eating garbage from the garbage dump, and that had upset the elders that this being was now eating human garbage, and they thought that that shouldn't be so, because their teachings and what they had shared at that time was that the Sabe, he's the keeper of the medicines, so he should not be eating the garbage, right? So that particular story, there had been three, again, robust men, men in the community. I believe one of them was a council member, and they had been doing a garbage run. So they had collected garbage from some of their family members and had loaded the truck up, and they had gone to the dump to go empty out the truck. And as you would expect in a remote community, there's always bears in the dump. So they're never ever surprised when you throw something in and then you see the bears run up on the other side like that, you know?
Right.
So, they got like 2 or 3 bags in, and they're watching, the bears slowly going up. And he said he maybe halfway through, he said there was still one big bear that he could see there's on the bottom that hadn't moved. And they kept throwing the thing out. And one of the guys was standing there and he lit a cigarette. And he said, and all of a sudden that thing moved, but wasn't a bear. It stood upright, turned around and looked at them. And then it walked right over top of and they freaked out, right? They got so upset. They didn't finish emptying the garbage. Like, the men were so startled. They jumped into the truck. The guy that had been trying to light his cigarette didn't actually get it lit. Like, he was like, did one of those, and they scrambled into the truck and drove off, right? So again, again, these are big hunting men that I would say, you couldn't scare these guys, but they ran away from the dump in a rush. So again, that story coming from elders was their concern that these creatures were eating garbage or digging through the garbage in the community dump. So I found that story was really interesting because it had nothing to do about whether they were real or not. It was a genuine concern that they were, even eating garbage.
Yeah. There's also, I think it was on one of the TV channels, could be APTN, somewhere in BC, where they kept hearing a sound come out of the woods near their community, but they couldn't figure out where this odd sound was coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And in that I think it was the same community where a little boy was walking in the woods and came across this, what he described was a Sasquatch looking at him, and I guess as the Sasquatch proceeded to walk toward him, he ran off back to his community and got told one of his parents' father, I think it was, about the incident. And they went back, of course, and checked it out. But, the Sasquatch, or this creature had gone enough. But I mean, like, a child would not tell a big story like that,
Mm-hmm.
and especially, and hunters, and elders,
And I know my parents came back from a fishing trip once, really early, and this is again is near Thunder Bay, maybe about 3 hours north of Thunder Bay. They had gone fishing to this lake we called Funny Lake, and it's a lake that you need to go off a remote road to access. And even in that road, you know how there's a swampy area and you have to navigate a canoe in a narrow
Marsh.
waterway just to get the marshway, just to get to the lake on the other side.
Yeah.
And they had to do that with a van, so they had taken a canoe in there. My mom and my dad and their fishing gear unloaded the canoe. They navigated to the lake, and at the far side of the lake was a nice bay, and the fish was really good in that bay. So they right away didn't waste any time on the lake part. They canoed right for the bay. And my mom was saying as soon as they got into that bay, they could smell this overwhelming smell, very powerful scent. And I guess she was paddling and she was wondering, what is that smell? And she didn't say anything to my dad. And I guess he was wondering the same thing. And while they were just getting ready to lift their paddles and start to get their fishing gear and their rods out, they got yelled at. So they heard this rah, big scream, and it was in a bay, so the sound was really loud. And I guess my mom said she just kind of put her rod down, grabbed her paddle, and continued paddling. And her and my dad didn't say anything to each other. I guess my dad did the same thing. They just started paddling, right? So the smell was very overwhelming. They just got screamed at by something that wasn't happy that they were in that bay. So they paddled all the way across the lake again to the van. And it wasn't until they got to the van that my mom asked my dad, what was that in the bay? Like they were so afraid that they didn't even speak. They just canoed in silence all the way back to the van. And when they got to the van, my dad said, "I'm pretty sure that was a Sasquatch." Right. So there was no hesitating when they heard that sound. They smelt that smell, and they got yelled at. That they had to leave. Right. So no conversation. They came back. They told us about that. We avoided that lake for a little while, even though it was a really good fishing lake. But I know for part of that summer, anyways, the guys didn't go there because, our parents told us there might be a Sasquatch in that area. Yeah, so lots of stories like that in Northwestern Ontario. Yeah. We have so much in our family. It's we just kind of laugh about it sometimes, where we tease each other about just being freaky about the bush, even though we grew up there, right?
Yeah. It always amazes me how, especially trappers that go out alone, for 2 months out the middle of nowhere, I'd be a little freaked out, I guess, but these guys are in their elements, and it's where they feel most comfortable doing it all their lives. So
yeah, it's funny because one of my cousins right now, he still is out in the northern woods, right? So in the north, where they have the remote fishing lodges and outpost lodges that the Americans go pay big bucks for. So he's way out there in the remote communities, which is the same area that I traversed as a child as well, where the trap lines were, right? So every once in a while we get on Facebook, we chat it up about what's going on with each other. And I'll usually ask him, so how's the Bigfoot activity up there, right? What's it like in Whitewater Lake? And he goes, well, I've been getting gifts. And I thought, yeah, oh, you've been getting gifts. Yeah, you've been getting gifts. He goes, yeah, there's a female Bigfoot here. And I think she likes me because she'll every once in a while leave some pebbles or some feathers just on the door. And he said that they can hear the screaming occasionally during the evenings, right? So the lodge owners will ask him every once in a while, what's that noise? Because they get afraid. And he'll say, oh, it's just mating moose. And sometimes he'll say it's fighting. The lynx are fighting in the forest. Don't worry about that, right? So he said that particular lodge in that lake has actually been sold 2 or 3 times over the last 20 years. And he said the last owners sold it because they were afraid of the noises. Yeah. So he said the new owners now he's not telling them what he thinks it is, right? So, but in our conversations back and forth, he says he's pretty sure it's a female. It's a female Sasquatch, a Save, that's walking around that area, maybe looking for a mate. And, she comes in and to the lodge every once in a while, sees what they're up to. But, yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. I've been talking to Irene Goodwin, she's the manager of the Legacy of Hope Foundation exhibitions. And this is one of her special interests, Sasquatch, Bigfoot. There are many, many legends and myths in the Aboriginal culture, and we hope to be exploring more of those as this project continues. Thank you for joining us, Irene, and always interesting to talk to you. I'm just there's another part of this, the last part of this podcast. It's called Roots and Hoots, and we just explored a bit about the roots, Aboriginal culture. And the other part is Hoots. Hoots is in reference to Aboriginal humor, I guess. There's humor in every culture, native culture, and that's probably one of our most common denominators. The Aboriginal people love to laugh and tell stories, jokes. So to end this podcast, Irene, I wonder if you have a funny story or a joke for us to tell?
Well, I guess I could tell one maybe related to the Save, right? The Sasquatch.
Sure. Yeah.
So anyways, so a group of Sasquatch, of course, they've purchased this camera equipment, and they've gone and had a lot of fun taking pictures and whatnot, having a really good time. And then they get their pictures back, and then they're all very upset. So there they are at the photo development lab, and they've got the receipts, and they're trying to get their money back. And their big complaint is all their photos are blurry.
Okay. Yeah, that's a hoot, all right.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how much money they spent, they're going to come out blurry.
Okay. All right, Irene, thank you very much again. And this is Roots and Hoots coming from you from the Legacy Hope Foundation. I hope you join us again in future podcasts. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.